Hello.
I am Lauren.
I am Ken.
And this is Paradise After Dark.
Dark.
Paradise After Dark is an independent podcast covering true crime,
Unsolved mysteries,
missing people,
and urban legends.
If you'd like to support our show and get a bunch of extra Paradise After Dark content, sign up for our Patreon at patreon.com/Palmahawk Media. That's PALMAHAWK Media.
And please check out our website at paradiseafterdark.com.
On our website, you'll find links to all of our episodes, even the archived episodes, our mailing list, merch store, links to our social medias, and of course our Patreon.
Yeah, we also have a virtual tip jar there, so if you want to leave us a tip, we'll give you a shout out on the show.
And we'd just like to remind everyone that Paradise After Dark will be on Podcast Row at CrimeCon 2020 in Las Vegas. That's April 30th through May 1st. And you can buy your ticket at crimecon.com. Make sure to use code PARADISE for 10% off.
Yeah, it's pretty neat when you get on to the Facebook page and there's a CrimeCon page there where people kind of share things and they ask questions. And so when you respond to them as someone that's going to be on Podcast Row that has been to numerous ones, they I don't know, they really interact with you and it's a lot of fun. So I think it's really going to be a great scenario to be in Vegas. Of course, that's going to be fun.
In Vegas.
Of course, that'll be fun. But that kind of sets a whole different scene than Austin, that's for sure. I mean, Austin was a blast. But I got a feeling Vegas is just going to be bigger and better. I think each year CrimeCon so far is just getting bigger and better. And I think they're doing more things and getting more people involved. So it's going to be a lot of fun. So, Lauren, tonight we're talking about a case which I got to tell you, when you start looking into and you're doing some research, and first of all, you got to get some baseline stuff and you start doing some research. But then when you really start getting into the details and the nuts and bolts of a case like this, it's always gut wrenching because it involves a small child, and that makes things so much worse.
Right. So we are going to be talking about the abduction and murder of a child this evening. Holly Kristen Piirainen was born January 19th of 1983 in Grafton, Massachusetts, to parents Christina Harrington and Richard Piirainen. Holly had two younger brothers, Andrew and Zachary Piirainen. Holly's parents were divorced but had joint custody of the children. Holly was a typical 10-year-old. She wanted to be a marine biologist, said Maureen Lemieux, Holly's grandmother. She loved the water, she loved swimming, she loved being out in Surbridge. She was a lovable little girl. Holly was 10 years old when she was vacationing with her father, brothers, and grandparents, Edward and Maureen Lemieux, at a cottage in Surbridge, Massachusetts.
Now, Surbridge is a really old town that's about 60 miles west of Boston, and that's between Springfield and Worcester.
Okay.
It's right in between. That's about 60 miles west of Boston to kind of paint the scene of where this actually takes place, which makes sense because you're close to the water. There's usually lakes and things like that in that area.
Well, the family owned a lakefront cottage there, and Holly had been there many times before and knew the area very well, even the woods surrounding the cabin.
Yeah, at that age, you kind of get out into the woods and explore, which makes sense why she would understand and know the surroundings, because obviously I'm sure it's not the first time she had visited her grandparents there.
It was August 5th of 1993 when Holly was last seen by her father at around noon. She and her 5-year-old brother Zachary were headed to the Come Next Spring farm, not far from their cottage, to look at some puppies and horses. During the walk, Holly told Zachary that one of the dogs at the home was mean, so he got scared and ran back home. Holly continued on without him. Holly's father waited about 10 minutes for Holly to return, and when she didn't, she sent her 8-year-old brother Andrew to fetch her. When Andrew came back saying he couldn't find Holly, the family hopped in the car to search for her. When they still couldn't find her, the police were called. Holly's mother, Christine, also rushed to the scene.
Yeah, Holly was 4'6", and she had shoulder-length blonde hair, and when she was last seen, she was wearing a Camp Marshall t-shirt and black tights. About 18 state and local officers searched for Holly for about 9 hours that day with no success. Now, the only thing they found was one of Holly's shoes on the side of the road. Overnight, state police helicopters with infrared technology continued the search in the woods, covering roughly a 3-mile radius of the area where Holly was last seen. Now, in an article in the Boston Globe from August 7th, 1993, Ernie Allen, director for the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children in Arlington, Virginia, called Holly's case a stereotypical kidnapping, wherein a child aged 5 to 12 is kidnapped by a stranger. Allen helped the authorities tap into local TV networks, color fax machines, and other high-tech devices to get Holly's picture and information out to the masses as quickly as possible.
Yeah, because remember, this is 1993, so we didn't have the internet or
yeah, it wasn't as prevalent like it is nowadays.
Right.
You didn't have all these social media sites.
They're talking about color fax machines. They're talking about being able to fax her photos to different towns around the area, things like that.
Yeah, you have to make as many people aware of what's going on as possible. Obviously, they're searching for a missing young girl. And overnight, the group of volunteers were able to get missing posters printed and television public service ads out about Holly's disappearance. Allen said, "Time is of the essence, and television is much more effective than a few milk cartons." Now, officials said they were hoping for a repeat of the Geneva May Crone scenario, where in June of 1992, a 12-year-old girl, Geneva Crone, was kidnapped, but later she was freed by her abductor when he saw her face flash on the TV. So, of course, he panics, and he's going to let her go. But later on, her kidnapper was arrested. So this is kind of the scenario that they're hoping for in this case.
Because of the possibility of an abduction, the FBI was called in. The longer this goes, there is a negative twist to it, and an ominous cloud starts to hover, Trooper Barbara Bennett told the Boston Globe. By day 3, more than 500 state and local police and volunteers searched 5 to 7 square miles, battling thick brush, swamps, and rocky ledges. Off-road vehicles and the state's entire force of 20 police dogs were used for the search. Several town buses ferried volunteers all day to search south and west of the pond. State police and local dive teams also searched and dragged the pond. If she was in there, we would have found her, a state police diver said. Despite rain and darkness, Surbridge Police Chief Kevin P. Fitzgibbons ordered the search to continue through the night. A command post was set up at the Hamilton Rod and Gun Club.
Well, this makes perfect sense because this chief obviously understands how this works. On the first 48 hours, you really need to get everything assessed and going as much as possible, especially when you're dealing with a very young child who may have very well taken off into the woods and became missing. Maybe she was injured. Maybe she got scared and ran off and was hiding there somewhere. So, you hear those stories where the little kid will run and just hide and they're scared of everything and everybody. They hear the noises. So you want to make sure to stay on this as much as possible, covering as much area as possible and as much presence as possible. So, kudos to them because they really handled this very well in the very beginning to kind of go there. But by the third day, the searches start to dwindle down because now they fear that the worst is possible. And the authorities then begin to focus on the possibility that Holly was abducted, meaning she's not even in the area anymore. Now, the Boston Globe reported that emotionally numbed family members grasp at hopes they would find Holly through prayer, psychics, or national television shows. Pretty much everything that they can hold on to.
They're kind of grasping at straws.
Everything they can, which is totally understandable at this point. The family admitted that they too believed Holly was abducted, but her father said he believed that she was still alive. "We haven't ruled out that she is out there somewhere," said State Police Lieutenant Timothy Hackett. But he also acknowledged that the chances of finding Holly in the area were very, very rare. They were, the odds of finding her are pretty slim at this point. So authorities have shifted their focus now to the information gathered from people who may have seen or heard something on the day that Holly vanished. "Some people see things that may think is nothing, but it may help us find her," Hackett said. They also interviewed known sex offenders in the area. Now, that's a pretty smart move, too, because, you really want to go after those people that are known sex offenders. Now, is that normally customary in these situations? Yes. That's usually a customary practice.
Yes.
Okay, so you search for them and all that, then you go talk to the people who may have something to do with it, because also in that realm, you would think that somebody may have heard something from someone else, because we don't know if these people run in groups, what their internet forums are. Well, although there wasn't much internet forums at this point, but who knows? The groups that these people know, they may have heard something that somebody saw this girl or had this girl. So it's a smart move on the detective's part.
By the 5th day of the search, police were going door to door in the neighborhood where Holly disappeared. There were at least 100 summer homes on the Quacumquasit Pond in the Allen Road and South Shore Road area. Roadblocks were also set up on Allen Road, near where Holly disappeared, so police could distribute flyers with Holly's photo and description on them. The roadblocks were operated between 11 a.m. and 1 p.m., at about the same time of day that Holly disappeared. Now, this makes sense that they would do that during the same time because people have a routine. People may be coming or going from work at that time every day, and they may have seen something, not even realized what they saw.
Exactly, catching those regular passerbys.
Right.
Who also could have been involved in the abduction.
That's true. So on Tuesday, August 10th, 1993, Holly's disappearance was featured on America's Most Wanted. 2 days later, Lieutenant Hackett said he believed Holly was still in the area. Why would an abductor take her out of an area now that we have national attention, he asked. The show generated about 100 tips, and investigators claimed they were followed up on every single one. Holly's own grandmother on her mom's side, Mary Harrington, said she hoped that whoever had Holly would do the right thing and drop her off somewhere. Her grandmother from her dad's side, Maureen Limino, set up a private phone line that could be used by anyone who might have information about Holly but are afraid to go to police. As all of this is happening, there is still smaller-scale ground searches happening. Police and volunteers were still searching the woods along Allen Road, under decks, in garbage cans, and under boat covers. They even searched an abandoned farmhouse in East Brookfield, north of where Holly disappeared.
Yeah, the disappearance of Holly changed the town of Surbridge, Massachusetts, for sure. I mean, the papers called it loss of rural innocence. And the families there stopped allowing their children to play outside alone. And going into the woods or playing near the woods was completely off limits because at this point, we still have no answers as to where Holly was or what happened. We just know where she was and where it happened. It's a big loss of freedom, said Diane Kane, who was pregnant and also had a 2-year-old daughter. We're in the sticks. I know it sounds like a broken record, but this sort of thing is not supposed to happen here. And Kane and her husband no longer left their garage door opener in the cars when they parked in the driveway. Makes sense because obviously someone could just get in there and pop your garage open. This had broken our trance and left us all shattered, said Michael Beaudry, a member of the small town planning board and father of 2 daughters who were almost Holly's age. So this is really putting a damper on the morale of the community. And it's a very small community, but, you know, sometimes those small communities, you know, a lot of people still hang together. Even though there wasn't internet, news still traveled fairly quickly. And one other thing, too, speaking of the small community that Lauren mentioned earlier, the grandmother set up a private phone line. And this I actually found to be a really good idea. And the reason is because a lot of locals fear other locals. So if you know somebody that is into the criminal element, and actually we've done some cases that are local here where we don't want to mention the name. We've left that out.
Yeah.
So in this scenario, I found this to be a very smart move. And I would like to hear more of these, you know, these ideas being brought forth on some of these cases when they happen. Because if you set up a private phone line in a small community, if there's someone who knows someone, but they're scared to death of them, they're not going to call the police because the police are going to say, hey, we talked to Charlie. Charlie said this about you. Okay, well, now you've just given up the name, or they might know where it's coming from. But if it's a private phone line, you could be a little more anonymous because now you're going to be talking more to a family member as opposed to law enforcement, where law enforcement are going to take that information. They're going to go after that person, and they might use your name, which could be bad later on. You know what I mean?
Well, it's like nowadays, though, they have Crime Stoppers where you can legitimately remain completely anonymous.
True. That is true. That's true. But I'm just saying, in this situation, I really like this idea.
It was a smart idea, definitely.
Because it allowed them saying, hey, we know that there's a little bit of bad people in town, so if you want to mention their name, call this number because we could keep you anonymous away from the police because then it's not record. You know, we can go to the police with your information. Same thing we tell, you know, our listeners, if there's something that you want to tell law enforcement, but you're scared for whatever reason, let us know. We'll let them know, you know. Yeah,
we've actually had people contact us, and I've contacted Crime Stoppers on their behalf.
2 instances since we've been doing this podcast that's occurred. So I just had to bring that back because it was a great idea. So
as mentioned earlier, Holly's family was involving psychics to try and locate their daughter. At least a dozen psychics offered their services, even from as far away as Florida.
There's that Florida element.
Richard and Christine, Holly's parents, would sometimes go out at all hours to search nearby shacks and tree houses, anywhere someone, psychic or otherwise, said Holly might be. After a month, police admitted they had no leads, no suspects, or persons of interest. The case was going cold. Holly's younger brothers were back in school in September. Her parents went back to work. The case was turned over to the Worcester District Attorney John J. Conti. Although Lieutenant Hackett said they still had a minimum of 4 detectives working on the investigation daily, and the FBI was still looking into it as well. But they all agreed that the probe didn't have much to go on.
And I can only imagine how that must have felt to all these people that put forth all this effort and they have nothing. It's a huge letdown and disappointment. I know people get upset with law enforcement, but you got to understand they have to be tore up as well. So let's take a quick break here, Lauren. And now here we are with the saddest part of this case. Because on October 23rd, 1993, 2 hunters were out hunting and stumbled upon a small human body while walking on a secluded road about 5 miles away from where Holly was last seen. Now, the skeletal remains were not positively identified as Holly Piirainen at first, but her father said police told him it was Holly, and they found the second sneaker and clothes Holly was wearing when she disappeared. We do not have forensic evidence yet to conclude it is Holly, but we do have some indication that it may be Holly, said Colonel Charles Henderson of the Massachusetts State Police. Now, the body was found in a wooded area near Five Bridges Road off of Route 20 in Brimfield, Massachusetts. It was not in an area that had been searched before. Now, Holly's family, of course, at this point is devastated because all of their hopes of finding Holly were pretty much destroyed because they were hoping to find Holly alive. And after 10 weeks of hanging posters, tracking leads, and raising reward money, all they could do was cry and hold each other as they watched the police press conference on TV. And, now for me, every time I hear that police press conference, I always go back to Abby and Libby in Delphi. And I put myself in that position. And then as I read what's being said or I hear what's being said, I visualize that era in time because it's so powerful.
The case we just covered last week when they did a press conference for Brittany Drexel.
Yeah.
And they announced something about a police press conference. It's either going to be really great news or it's going to be a really bad news.
Most of the case, it's the latter.
The body was taken away in a van to the state chief medical examiner's office and an autopsy was scheduled. Members of the chief dental examiner's office left the site shortly before the remains were removed. As he left the scene, Harry Schwartz of the dental examiner's office told reporters that all investigators were ordered not to comment on the case. State police forensic experts combed the area where Holly's body was found. They meticulously examined the heavily wooded area, took photos, and scoured the area for clues. State police, however, remained silent on whether there were any suspects in the abduction and murder of 10-year-old Holly, until a press conference the following day, wherein Colonel Charles Henderson said there were no suspects in the case.
So at this point, they've admitted they don't have anything.
No. Holly was laid to rest on November 14th, 1993. More than 500 people attended Holly's funeral at St. Philip's Church. Undercover detectives stood watch over the mourners, believing that the killer may have been in attendance. Although there were no suspects, many investigators have theorized that the abduction of Holly Piirainen was random, as very few people knew that the family was in the area, and fewer knew that the children would be looking at the puppies that day.
That's a very good point, because, obviously the timing of the whole scenario, it just seemed very random and spur of the moment. Mm-hmm. However, if someone knew them and followed them there and knew they were going to be there, it could be a local that knew that she came there regularly at this time. Who knows? So I understand why they would be at her funeral to pay attention to what's going on, to see who's there and document who's there, because remember, they have nothing. So again, like you said earlier, they're grasping at straws. Well, they've got to get all these straws picked up and put into place so they at least know what straws to look at.
Right.
So it's a very smart move on their part. And in a strange coincidence, a young girl from the same area named Molly Bish wrote a letter to Holly's family. The letter said, "I am very sorry. I wish I could make it up to you. Holly is a very pretty girl. She is almost as tall as me. I wish I knew Holly. I hope they found her." This Molly Bish at age 10. Now, Molly Bish was later kidnapped and murdered 7 years after Holly was found dead. Now, Molly's remains were similarly found in a wood area in Worcester County, and police immediately considered at the time that Holly's killer was also Molly's killer. A former Springfield resident, David Poulet, is considered a person of interest in both of these cases.
It wasn't until January of 2012 that there was a break in Holly's case. During a news conference at the Hampton Hall of Justice, Hampden District Attorney Mark G. Mastroianni said forensic tests had tied David Poulet, who died in 2003, to the scene of where Holly's body was discovered. The forensic evidence was reportedly DNA. Mastroianni declined to identify what the evidence is which links Poulet to the crime, although he did say that the nature of the items shows that either Mr. Poulet or someone associated with him was in the immediate area at the time relevant to Holly's disappearance and the findings of her remains. In his obituary, David Poulet was described as an avid fisherman and outdoorsman. He was said to have frequented the area where Holly was found. Poulet was once arrested in 1999 after police watched him buy cocaine and snort it on the driver's seat of his Dodge pickup truck. Besides the one drug incident, police say Poulet has no other records of violent crimes or sex offenses. He died of congestive heart failure in August of 2003. Although this forensic evidence was found and said to have directly linked him to the scene, he was never named a suspect, and the details of the evidence have never been shared.
One tidbit I want to give here, because a lot of people on Reddit and some of the platforms that people have out there where they discuss this particular case, they really went after this guy, and some people said it's him. Why don't they just convict him? I'm like, well, first of all, he already passed away, and people say, well, he should be charged and they should go ahead and name him because they found DNA there. Now, DNA is usually said to be the end all be all, right? But here's the problem with this scenario, because you got a wooded area. This guy, he was a local. He could have been hunting there, or he could have been out walking this trail. It could have been something like a cigarette butt that was thrown down. It could have been, ammunition that he had dropped. It could have been a clothes, something to the effect that may have had his DNA there, which could have been deposited there prior to or after. So I understand why the police are saying this guy is not a suspect in this case, because we don't know how old the evidence was. It was there. It could have been fairly new. So I get frustrated, when you're looking into these cases and you're starting to see these things and people start getting so angry, like, this has to be the guy. That's him. That's him. Not necessarily, because now we have to look at basically all involved, everyone that's there, because, years later in October of 2020, Massachusetts investigators exhumed a body as a part of the investigation into Holly's murder. The body was not that of David Poulet. Sources told 5 Investigates that investigators exhumed the body of a man from a cemetery in Hampden County who died 4 years after Holly's murder. Leah Jolin, Holly's cousin, told Western Mass News that investigators exhumed the body of a young man at a cemetery in Hampden County in a search of a letter that had been placed in his coffin with potential information that could be useful in Holly's case. There had been a letter placed in his coffin when he passed, and someone contacted them and told them something in the letter of interest, Jolin explained. She said that the man would have been 18 years old at the time Holly went missing, but right now investigators can't use that information to determine who killed Holly. 20 years in the ground, it had a lot of water damage, so basically we have been told they're not really sure they're going to find anything useful, Jolin said. So basically, the coffin got some leakage, there's water damage. I mean, we're talking about, it's already starting to be consumed by the earth. But
they never did release who they exhumed.
Exactly. That, and we also don't know if they were able to find anything in the letter. There's a lot of other things involved, so...
Well, to this day, Holly's case is still unsolved. Anyone with information about this case is asked to call the Massachusetts State Police Detectives Unit assigned to the Hampden District Attorney's Office at 413-505-5993. Tipsters can also use text-a-tip by texting the word crimes 274-637 and typing the word solve into the body of the message following the tip. But before we close out, I'd like to just explore the possible connections between Holly Piirainen and Molly Bish. So, as we mentioned earlier, 7 years after Holly's murder, Molly was abducted and murdered. Molly Bish was 16 years old when she disappeared while working as a lifeguard in her hometown of Warren, Massachusetts, on June 27, 2000. Warren, Massachusetts is approximately 10 miles north of Surbridge, where Holly was abducted. The day before Holly disappeared, her mother, Maggie, had noticed a man sitting in a white sedan in the parking lot at Cummins Pond, where Molly worked as a lifeguard. The man was just sitting in his car smoking a cigarette, and Maggie thought this was odd. The following day, Maggie again dropped her daughter off at the pond for her lifeguard shift, but did not see the man or the white sedan. However, another witness reported that he saw a man matching the stranger's description in the pond's parking lot just minutes before Bish arrived. A local worker also reported that he saw a similar car parked at a cemetery connected to the pond by a path. Molly's case was profiled on numerous American television shows, including Disappeared, From Investigation Discovery, America's Most Wanted, Unsolved Mysteries, and 48 Hours. Her skeletal remains were found 3 years later in the woods of Whiskey Hill in nearby Palmer, just a few miles away from the pond.
And like I said at the very beginning of this, when it involves a child, those things just really tear you up when you start seeing the connections of these cases. You got this young girl and this young girl, and it just grows exponentially on you. So
let's take one more quick break.
And of course, you got to give props to law enforcement because they're not giving up on Holly's abduction. So they're still trying to look for answers. I mean, we spoke about David Poulet, who, he passed away in, 2003. So 10 years after Holly was abducted.
Right.
And they're still looking into the case. And then we fast forward again to 2009, where a suspect named Rodney Stanger was investigated. So they're still into the case. I mean, we're in 2009 now, and we're still looking into this. So they've not given up, which is a really, really good thing to hear in a case like this. Stanger, he had lived in an area where Holly and Molly both were murdered for more than 20 years before he moved to Florida about a year after Molly's disappearance. Now, in Florida, he lived with his brother Randy. Now, until Randy went missing in 2005, never to be heard from again. So this is a little suspicious in itself. And this connection was made when the sister of Stanger's girlfriend, Crystal Morrison, notified Massachusetts police that her sister Crystal had hinted that Rodney was connected to Molly's murder, which again they believe is connected to Holly's. Now, only days later, Crystal was found murdered in Rodney's trailer. So this guy, to me, looks a little more suspicious because now we've got the person he was living with missing. Someone kind of ratted him out. Now, they're found murdered in Rodney's trailer, which is his own trailer, stabbed repeatedly and decapitated. So this person's very violent.
Very depraved.
Exactly, very violent, which is kind of what we're looking for in the other case. I mean, so they fit the profile. And, of course, now Rodney, he's arrested for that murder. Now, Stanger was reportedly an outdoorsman who was very familiar with the area and owned the same type of car Maggie described seeing a day before her daughter's disappearance. So before Molly's disappearance, remember the white car we spoke about?
Yeah.
Exactly. So that white vehicle is the same type of car that Rodney had. Now, in 2009, when Stanger was investigated for the Bish murder, police also questioned him in connection with the 1993 murder of Holly Piirainen. Now, although, as we mentioned earlier, in 2012, forensic evidence led authorities to the man named David Poulet. Now, again, he died in 2003 as a person of interest in the case. I personally don't feel like he had much to do with it. And again, I think there's something else going on.
The Stanger guy.
He fits the profile a little more hefty to me.
Well, according to Molly Bish's sister Heather, as of June 2021, evidence taken from Rodney Stanger's trailer has still not been tested in connection with Molly's murder. Stanger has not been charged in either case.
Sadly.
In November of 2011, a convicted child rapist named Gerald Battistoni was named as a suspect in Molly's death by private detective Dan Malley. According to Battistoni's second wife, as quoted by the Telegram and Gazette, her ex may have been involved in the murders of both Holly and Molly. The second wife told the newspaper that on the day Molly Bish disappeared, Battistoni said he was working on their car, a white Chevy, and had taken it for a drive in the Warren area. The connection to the disappearance and murder of Holly Piirainen lies within the child he was convicted of raping. The Telegram and Gazette reported that the rape victim's mother was a real estate agent who had a home for rent with her name and photo on the sign in the yard near Holly's grandmother's home. Are you following along with this?
I am. Oh, yeah.
So Malley said that the rape victim lived in Warren, close to Cummins Pond, in 2000 when Molly worked there. One of his wives said when they lived in Ware, Massachusetts, Battistoni often cut over Whiskey Hill to buy drugs from a dealer in Warren. When Malley compared a sketch of the man seen at Cummins Pond the day before Molly's disappearance, it bore a striking resemblance to Battistoni.
So you're saying that basically the sketch looked like this?
Yes.
Looked like this guy.
When it was reported that Battistoni was a possible suspect in both cases, he attempted suicide in prison by slitting his own throat.
Attempted. He
survived his suicide attempt, but was moved from Walpole State Prison to Bridgewater State Hospital after the incident. Battistoni died from natural causes at the hospital in November of 2014.
Now, I spoke to a guy one time I was in prison. I was doing some sort of interview, and he said that a lot of times they'll do that. Inmates that fear a prison or where they're at, that may have been involved with hurting a child or something. Sometimes it gets to be rough. They'll do things like that to get out of the prison and be sent to the hospital. So they want to be sort of in the hospital ward as opposed to in general population, because if someone finds out or gets wind of them hurting a child, it could be very bad for an inmate, as we kind of all know. When you go to prison for molesting a child, murdering a child, things don't always pan out so well for you. So they will try to harm themselves just to get out of gen pop if they can. So now here we are in June of 2021. Worcester County District Attorney Joseph Early announced a new person of interest in the Molly Bish murder, Francis P. Sumner Sr. Now here we are still in recent times, and we're talking less than, was it 6 months ago, 7 months ago now, that they're still working the Molly Holly case, which is pretty impressive at this point. Now, Sumner died in 2016, but he was a registered sex offender who lived in Spencer, Massachusetts. And on July 9th of 1982, Sumner was convicted of an aggravated rape and kidnapping from an attack the prior October inside an apartment that Sumner was trying to rent. He was sentenced to concurrent sentences of 15 to 18 years on the rape charge and 9 to 10 years on the kidnapping charges. Now, the earliest Sumner could have been released from Walpole State Prison was in 1997, so he may have been in prison at the time Holly was murdered. It was not immediately clear how long Sumner was incarcerated for that case. Now, Early said that Sumner was incarcerated several times during his life. Sumner had access to a white car that a customer left at his repair shop in Rutland in late June of 2000. He had ties to Warren, and most notably, he bore a strong resemblance to a sketch of a man Molly's mother, Maggie, saw at Commons Pond the day before Molly's disappearance, as we spoke about earlier, the gentleman in the white car. Now, as recently as December of 2021, investigators traveled to Ohio to obtain DNA from Sumner's son, Francis Jr. Now, the younger Sumner is incarcerated at the London Correctional Institution in Ohio for aggravated robbery, according to our records from the Ohio Department of Rehabilitation and Corrections. So think about this. Here we are this many years in advance or advanced on, and we're still going back getting DNA. So I'm very, I just with this law enforcement agency, I've got to give them full props because they're still working this case where a lot of times we see where law enforcement kind of gives up.
Right. So my question, do you think that the Holly Piirainen and Molly Bish cases could be connected?
I think they could be because as we know in this genre, and I hate to use I always say genre, and it's almost like it's a song thing, but I say that because in the true crime world, people think differently. We know these things. We know cases. There are certain cases we hear that open up doors to other cases. So like I say, we talked about one particular case, and I'm like, well, that sounds like the Maura Murray case or sounds like this case because there's always these popular cases surrounding everything. What I get is sometimes the first abduction creates other abductions. So, there's always
like a copycat.
Well, not necessarily. What I'm saying is a person that does it once, they're like, they do it and it's a thrill, but then they don't get caught. Nothing happens.
Oh,
they're
so
like,
they do it again.
I'm going to try it again. Oh, that rush, because we know serial killers, they get a rush from this. Molesters, abductors, rapists, they get a rush from it, sadly. And unfortunately, that's just their mindset. So when they get away with it, they want to do it again. So it could be someone in this general vicinity that did it once and like, okay, the next time this situation comes up, I'm going to do it again. If we take a look at the Bobby Joe Long case, which was just released a few weeks ago, he was driving home and then he saw Lisa McVeigh riding her bicycle along the side of the road, and he just had to do it. He had to have it. And so he kidnapped her. So in these situations, I feel like whoever took Holly, I do believe 100% that Holly's case and Molly's case are connected, but I believe that there's others in between that are not connected that might be in the vicinity that just haven't been put together in this case.
Well, if they're connected, then this Francis P. Sumner Sr. could not be a suspect because he was in prison at the time that Holly was abducted and murdered.
If he is the one, I feel more like the Rodney Stangler is going to be more along the lines of the most possible. But I feel like the investigators have worked this case enough that they would have already pinned him if that was the case. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So, but then again, they're just checking every avenue, and these are just the ones that are prevalent, the ones that we can get information on. We don't know what investigators know, but I go back to that area where, when they showed up at the funeral of Holly, and they said, we're going to sit here and we're going to check into this. We're going to watch these people, see who's here because we think the killer might be here. That takes me right back to the Libby and Abby case. Mentally, it's like, the killer could very well be in this room.
Yes. Yeah.
We want you to know that we know what you know. And so I feel like they're working it, and there would be more information, but I think their suspects we're not going to know about yet. So if for some reason they can put ties to it, so maybe this, this Francis Sumner, maybe if they get the DNA, if they can pin it to at least Molly, maybe not Holly, but okay, then the cases aren't connected. Because I'm not saying the cases have to be connected. I'm kind of feeding on the fact that I feel like they are, only because it's the same area, it's the same scenario.
Kind of the same MO. Exactly.
So I feel like, but I don't feel like it's the only one. I feel like it's too far of a separation that, they could not be connected, or there's others in between. I don't feel like this is the first time. It's a child. You know what I mean? If you're an adult and you kidnap an adult and this sort of scenario takes place, that's a different person. A person that is such a horrible, awful human being to kidnap, abduct, and murder a small child is a whole different breed of person. So I can't believe that they would have moved on to something, or they would only done it once and never done it again. You understand what I'm saying?
Right.
So I feel like, yes, they are connected.
Okay.
But again, I'm not an investigator, and I can barely pronounce Worcester. So I know nothing of the area. I just know what I've looked at looking into this case. So what do you think? What's your feeling?
I think that there is a possibility that they're connected.
But you don't feel like it is 100%.
I didn't say that I don't feel like it is 100%. No, actually, I don't feel like it is 100%. But I feel like there is a possibility that the cases are connected. And I am just hoping and looking forward to more information coming out. I mean, the latest information came out in December 2021, which was less than 2 months ago. So I feel like the cases are still being worked. Molly Bish and Holly Piirainen. And if there is a connection, then I hope the police connect it, and I hope they find out who did it.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking almost 30 years later, and they're still working the Holly and Molly cases. And I just got to give them props on that.
So anyone with information regarding the Molly Bish case can contact the Massachusetts State Police Detective Unit at 508-832-9124. And again, anyone with information about the Holly Piirainen case can contact the Massachusetts State Police Detective Unit assigned to the Hampton District Attorney's Office at 413-505-5993. And that's going to be it for our episode this week.
So again, if you'd like to support the show, please subscribe to our Patreon at patreon.com/Palmahawk Media. That's PALMAHAWK Media.
Check out our website for links to all of our social media, Patreon, merch store, and more.
Much, much more. And please make sure to subscribe to the show on whatever platform you're listening on, and rate and review. This really helps us branch out and reach a wider audience.
And thank you for listening
to Paradise After Dark.
Dark, 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 dark.